These are two of Clay Imports' most popular terracotta flooring products, the Baked Paver, and this is the organic tile. And these are the three sealers that we're going to be testing on these two products. Clay Imports Penetrating Sealant. This is ideal for keeping your terracotta tile as matte and natural looking as possible. The Ultra Low VOC Sealant. This is ideal for working on a project that you might be living in, like if you're living in a house and you're applying the sealant. This is not going to release any harmful or toxic odors. It will result in a slight satin finish, though. And for the first time, boiled linseed oil. Boiled linseed oil is traditionally used or commonly used in Mexico for carpentry projects. I'm in Mexico doing this experiment right now, and this just happens to be the brand Dura Madera of linseed oil that was available at the hardware store. But this should be very common to any linseed oil that you might have access to. The first step in applying a sealer or any type of an oil or a coating to any clay or terracotta products is the container. Pour your sealer or your oil into a container. Do not pour it directly onto the surface of the tile. And make sure that the container is large enough so that you can dip your applicator tool, whether that's a sponge or a brush, into and have enough room to shake it off as you're pulling it out of the container so that you don't get any drops on the surface of the unsealed tile. Sometimes these drops can be permanent, or if not permanent, they can take a long time before they blend into the rest of the tile. And as you can see from the first coat, especially with this penetrating sealer, it absorbs really quickly. I'm referring to this as a single coat, this first coat a single coat, but you can see that I'm applying sealer on top of areas that have already received coating. And this particularly applies to the penetrating sealer because it evaporates so quickly, and it absorbs into the terracotta. It absorbs into dried, unsealed terracotta very quickly. And then the ultra low VOC, this does not evaporate as fast as the penetrating sealant, and it doesn't soak into the tile near as quickly either. This is a surface sealer, so it will penetrate into the terracotta products somewhat, but not as much as the penetrating sealer. These tend to dry on the surface more than soak into the actual terracotta. And this is what the first coat of the surface low VOC sealer looks like. You can start to see the sheen developing. So on the linseed oil, this is the first time, I've said this before, this is the first time that I've applied linseed oil to any terracotta or any Clay Imports products, really. So this is really an experiment for me. And one of the first things I noticed is how evenly it spreads. I was expecting it, because it feels so thick, I thought it was going to get streaky or that it wasn't going to spread very evenly. But it did. It spread, I would say, comparably as easily as the ultra low VOC. First coat has been applied. This is, on the left is the reference of the unsealed terracotta products, the baked paver on top, and then the organic below. And here's all three of them with the sealer samples. The penetrating sealer, that first coat has already completely dried, and I plan on doing 3 coats of that sealer. And if it works properly, it should make our finished or our sealed products, they should look very similar to the unsealed or the unfinished ones, but they should have the sealer protection. Then there's the low VOC. This is 1 coat of the low VOC. It is a satin finish, and you can already see that satin sheen starting to develop on the surface. And the last one was the linseed oil, baked linseed oil or boiled linseed oil. It darkened the tiles significantly. It turned the organic a really pretty kind of honey gold color. It looks like it's going to take a little longer for the linseed to dry. I'm going to go ahead and start applying second coats of the others, and hopefully by the time I get to the linseed, it'll be ready for its second coat. The second coat of penetrating sealer is applying much faster than the first coat. It's not absorbing into the terracotta near as fast as the first coat did. You can see that I've even got a few drops on the tile, which I really try to avoid, but the penetrating sealer is incredibly forgiving. The low VOC second coat similarly is spreading really fast. The baked paver did not absorb near as much on the second coat as it did on the first coat. And on the linseed oil, this is very experimental for me, and I feel like the linseed oil took just as much on that second coat as it did on the first coat. It's not really evaporating; it's just soaking up. Here are all of the sample pieces with the second coat of sealer applied. For reference, on the left are the unsealed terracotta pieces, the baked paver on top, and the organic terracotta on the bottom. The linseed oil with 2 coats, the ultra low VOC with 2 coats, and we're clearly starting to see that low satin finish sheen develop on both of those products. And then the penetrating sealant with 2 coats. The organic is almost completely dry. It's incredible how fast this sealer dries. The penetrating sealer, if it works like it's supposed to, should look very similar to the unsealed or unfinished terracotta pieces, but they should have the protection of the sealant. The second coat of sealer has been drying for about 30 to 45 minutes. The low VOC looks a little shiny, but that's how it's supposed to look. It's going to dry with a satin finish, but it definitely feels dry to the touch. The penetrating sealant looks dry and feels completely dry. It actually feels just like a factory tile with no sealer on it at all. And the linseed oil is still a little spotty. I'm not entirely sure how long it's supposed to take for these spots to even out, or if they're going to even out. But it definitely feels very dry, and I think it's okay to put the third coat on, and the third and final coat on right now. For the third and final coat on the sealer samples, I'm going to be using a sponge. I mentioned earlier that for the first couple of coats, I like to use a brush because the surface of the terracotta is really coarse and rough at first. But once you get 2 coats of sealer on the surface, it starts to smooth out significantly, smooth enough so that you can use a sponge and rub it across the surface, and it's not going to tear the sponge up and leave any sponge debris on the tile. Also, in the final coats of sealing, sometimes if you don't have a fine enough brush, you can see the brush stroke marks. It's very faint, and they usually go away just after a little bit of use of the floor or mopping the floor a couple of times. But using the sponge will ensure that we don't have any of those brush stroke marks. So for the last 2 coats of the penetrating sealant and the ultra low VOC sealant, for the last 2 coats on these, I'm going to be using a sponge. I'm going to continue to use the brush on the linseed oil because this isn't showing any brush stroke marks at all. We're applying the final coat with the sponge, and one thing to watch out for, really pay attention to, and this applies to either brush or sponge, is debris. The little pieces of the sponge sometimes can start to break off of the sponge, and they can stick into the sealer. The same with the brush. You can start to, if the brush starts to wear away, some of the bristles from the brush can actually get stuck in the sealer. Keep an eye out for that, and if you see that happening over and over again, replace that applicator tool. First, before we get to the coffee and the wine test, I just want to look at the sheen and compare the tiles to the untreated organic, and this is the penetrating sealant. It looks identical to a factory tile. However, the baked paver does have some subtle differences after the penetrating sealant was applied. And I would say primarily it kind of brought out like these dark spots in the tile. It didn't really darken up the back of the tile or the majority of it. It just kind of highlighted a few of these dark spots. The low VOC, on the other hand, did not highlight any dark spots, but it left a sheen. It left a subtle but obvious sheen. And it did that with both the baked paver and the organic tile. And the penetrating sealer, of course, has no sheen at all. This is just a damp rag with water. I'm just kind of wiping it on there. This will dry really fast. but just removing some of the scuffs from the surface. And another thing to note on the low VOC, even though it didn't bring any spots out, there's areas on the tile that were kind of, the texture was a little different, and it made those texture, those smoother areas, it made them kind of a different color. And this is an interesting one. This is the first time that I've applied linseed oil to the baked paver and the organic tile. And they did darken a little bit from the factory tiles. The organic, not so much, but the baked paver did significantly. And I think it has a really pretty look. Just removing the dust from the surface. But yeah, I think it's got a really pretty kind of leathery almost look. The organic didn't change much at all. I would say maybe it darkened just a little. But I just want to note also that linseed oil is not a sealant. Linseed oil is an oil, and as an oil, it can penetrate into the product, and it can create some moisture resistance on the surface. But it's not a designated sealer, so it's not going to protect the same way that the penetrating sealer or the low VOC sealers do. Is red wine, Cabernet, and I'm just going to pour a little on each of the tiles. Yeah, this is a really interesting one. The way that the penetrating sealer and the wine are reacting to each other is kind of crazy. And now let's put some black coffee on all of them. All of our tiles now have a significant amount of red wine and black coffee on the surface. The tiles have been sitting with the coffee and the wine on them for about 5 minutes now. All the tiles have been sitting for almost 10 minutes now with the liquid on the surface, and I can actually see some penetration of wine happening on this linseed coated baked paver. I'm not seeing any real penetration happening in any of the others. But the one that I find the most interesting is probably this penetrating sealer, specifically on the organic tile. It's just dripping, running right off. And that's without even wiping it. Now I'm going to start to wipe these tiles. This just has a little bit of water on it. And the combination between the penetrating sealer and the organic tile is pretty crazy. This looks like exactly like a factory, unfinished, unsealed tile, but it completely, the sealer completely protected the tile from any staining at all. The baked paver, on the other hand, I'm wiping this tile down, and I can see where the wine is leaving some spots on the surface. We're going to let this dry now, and just to see if they'll stay there. And now the ultra low VOC, starting with the organic tile. Similar to, but not as extreme. It pretty much dripped right off the surface. But because of that sheen that this tile has, it doesn't surprise me as much as the penetrating sealer. And now on the baked paver, that's completely protected. So that's really interesting. That means we had greater effectiveness with the penetrating sealer on the organic tile, and we had greater effectiveness with the low VOC on the baked paver. And lastly, the linseed oil. I'm going to start with the baked paver on this one, just seeing how much runs off the surface. And that oil is certainly providing some protection. It seems more so for the coffee than the wine, but it provided more protection than I had anticipated. And it's actually a really cool look. And now the linseed oil in the organic tile. Not as effective as the linseed oil was on the baked paver. And this is just water. It's been well over an hour since I cleaned the coffee and the wine off of these tiles with the damp rag, and starting with the penetrating sealer on the baked paver. I can see a little outline of the coffee or the wine, but I can certainly see a little liquid outline. It's subtle, but I see it. Now, as far as the organic paver, there's nothing. There's no sign of any staining on this tile. It looks like a brand new tile. Not only does it look brand new, it looks like it doesn't have any sealant on it at all. It looks just like a factory tile right out of the factory. And moving to the ultra low VOC. The ultra low VOC on both the baked paver and on the organic, it shows no signs at all of any staining from either the coffee or the wine. The ultra low VOC, as I pointed out earlier though, this does have a satin finish, and it also brings out or highlights some of the imperfections from the factory on the surface of the tiles. And again, not a bad look at all, but certainly something to be aware of before you seal your entire floor. And then lastly, the linseed oil. And again, this is the first time that I've applied linseed oil to any clay imports products. And starting with the baked paver, there's no staining on this tile at all, which is kind of shocking to me. But as I pointed out, the linseed oil did give the baked paver kind of like this distressed leathery look, which looks super cool. The linseed oil on the organic tile, very clearly see both the coffee and the wine stains. And then for reference, these are our two pieces with no sealer or oil on them compared to the other sealed and oil-coated products. All of these tiles have 3 coats of sealant or oil on them. However, you can apply more than 3 coats, especially with the penetrating sealer. We already saw how effective the penetrating sealer was on the organic tile. More penetrating sealer can be added to the baked paver, making it more effective. The reason that Clay Imports recommends 3 coats of sealer is because with some products and some sealers applying more than 3 coats, like the ultra low VOC, it can actually result in a buildup on the surface of the tile, thick enough to where that buildup, that thick layer, can potentially start to peel or possibly even scratch or flake. So the ultra low VOC, once you start to see a buildup of the material on the surface, then you should probably stop applying sealer. We do know, based on this test, that 3 coats does not build up excessively, and it is very effective. The penetrating sealer, however, we can certainly apply more coats onto both of these. And unlike the buildup that you potentially could get from the low VOC sealant, the penetrating sealer will not build up on the surface. It'll basically just keep soaking into the pores of the material until it can't soak in anymore. And once that happens, anything left on the surface will evaporate. The linseed oil is really interesting though. This is certainly something that's going to require experimenting on loose pieces of tile, not on your installed floor. An accumulation or too much linseed oil on a terracotta tile can result in an irreversible, gummy texture on the surface of the tile. And lastly, always remember, when experimenting with sealants or trying to determine which kind of sealer or how many coats of sealer you need to apply, do that on loose, non-installed pieces before actually applying any of these sealers or oils to your installed tile.